Thank you, and good morning, everyone. And welcome to USC Annenberg. I'm, as Jeff said, David Westphal. I'm the executive in residence at the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism, and also senior fellow at the Center on Communication, Leadership, and Policy. And I wanted to mention those two organizations in full because they are the sponsors of today's event, and I'm grateful to both for making this day possible. Today also reflects the new emphasis that the leadership of Annenberg, under Dean Ernest Wilson, is placing on entrepreneurship as part of his economic literacy and entrepreneurship initiative. And I cannot think of a group of people who represent entrepreneurship better than the folks who are leading this news revolution by operating community and neighborhood news sites. And so I especially want to welcome those of you engaged in this work and who are on the revolution's front line, not least of which because I have some idea of what it means to leave work behind for a day to attend a conference like this. We welcome those as well, like myself, who have come to learn about your work and about what it means to be entrepreneurs in this emerging world. Some of you, I think, for example, Barry Parr of CoSider, have been covering and engaged in your communities on the web for quite a few years now. Others, like Susan Murnett and Quan Booth, who just launched Oakland Local a few weeks ago, are newcomers at this. But along the same lines, some of you are nonprofits, some of you are on the for-profit side, but all of you are engaged in the tremendously important work of producing news and information in the public interest, and at a time of tremendous uncertainty in the news business, attempting to prove that this work is sustainable. And so we come to the title of today's program, Entrepreneurship and the Community Web. We've asked each of the website presenters to share their best entrepreneurial idea, and we hope by the end of the day that means that you'll head home with a pocket full of great ideas, some of which we hope you'll be able to incorporate into your own operations. In the process, you'll be able to share the stories of your businesses with your counterparts from around the state and with those of us at Annenberg, and with the audience that is watching on our live stream. You'll also hear from Jarl Mohn, entrepreneur extraordinaire, who will be our speaker this morning, and from Jonathan Weber, who's also charting an extraordinary entrepreneurial chart at New West in Montana. I want to say also a personal word about the website operators who are with us today. I began writing about community news websites a little more than a year ago. My first interview was down at Voice of San Diego at the offices there, and since then I've come to understand a bit about the world of community news sites. It's obviously exhilarating, tremendously rewarding, and simultaneously a mighty challenge that tests the stamina and skill, and oftentimes, I suspect, the bank accounts of all engaged in this work. So I want to say on behalf of Annenberg that we salute you. We're inspired by what you do, and also that your work is of tremendous importance to us at Annenberg. We know that our work here today will be much better by listening to you. A couple of housekeeping matters before we begin. As you can see in the agenda, the Twitter hashtags for today's meeting are hashtag CAWEB and hashtag ASCJ. Also I want to mention for all website operators who haven't filled out a survey yet, please pick one up. Monica, they're at the check-in table, so if you haven't gotten one, please pick one of those up and fill it out. We'd be appreciative. We'll let you all know the results of that survey. And also, before I introduce Geneva, I want to recognize my colleague, Jeff Cowan, who heads the Center for Communication, Leadership, and Policy which has provided hours of staff time for today's event. Jeff, would you stand? Wait. Now, I can tell you from personal knowledge that Geneva Overholser has been talking about entrepreneurship almost from the day she took over as director of the Annenberg School of Journalism in July of 2008. More to the point, entrepreneurship is being richly incorporated now into the Annenberg curriculum. Geneva?
Thank you, David. It's great to be able to join David in welcoming all of you here to USC Annenberg. This is a fun conference. We're delighted to be able to sponsor it along with the Communication Leadership Center. I was on a panel at Pomona College a week or so ago with a couple of people, one of whom was Richard Perez-Pena, media reporter for the New York Times, as many of you will recognize. And he said to me, why in the world would anyone want to run a journalism school at this moment in time? And you know, the fact is, while many people would say that's a perfectly valid question, the reasons are myriad. One thing is, of course, that the public needs the information that we all provide more than ever and needs the talented young people who will come through this program and continue that stream of high-quality information. Another is that we can provide information to help inform the debate about the future of journalism, and I am very grateful to David and to others at the Communication Leadership Center for helping to provide that information in research on nonprofits and their role, and research on the role of government, which many people like to deny, but there is no denying it, and in so many other arenas. But one of the reasons we really are glad to be running a journalism school here is that we, too, can help supply the information that the public needs, and which is gradually, and sometimes not so gradually, being eroded as the economic underpinnings of media are collapsing. So I wanted to note here at the beginning of the morning that we at USC Annenberg are in fact engaged in a number of community web news outlets ourselves. I see some of the people who are running them represented here. One is Intersections, the South Los Angeles reporting project, which reports on our own neighborhood very richly in collaboration with people in our community. And Willa Seidenberg is back here. Raise your hand, Willa, who runs Intersections. I'm delighted you're here. Is Bill Sellis around as well? No. But Emily is. Yes, Emily, raise your hand. One of the wonderful things we do with Intersections is to work with a number of high schools, and that, among many other things, are particularly strong leadership by Emily is making possible. Emily graduated from Annenberg last year, and we have a way of keeping particularly talented people around to keep the good work going. We also have in Alhambra, another neighborhood in Los Angeles, which in fact has 3 primary languages, Mandarin, Spanish, and English, and which of course is therefore presented with a particular challenge in solving civic problems. How do you bring a community together to do that? Michael Parks, back here, Michael, raise your hand, my predecessor as director, is in charge of that, a very interesting project, along with colleagues in the communication school, which is one of the strengths of our being here at Edinburgh, having the 2 schools together. We also have neontommy.com. I hope you all will get to know that during your time here, doing some really interesting reporting, breaking stories on swine flu recently, for example, and being picked up left and right, as well as Annenberg television news and Annenberg radio news and our documentary program, Impact. So we're proud to join all of you in providing information for the communities in which we live. And now it is my great pleasure to present to you the leader of our school, the dean, Ernie Wilson, who is absolutely one of the main reasons this school is exhibiting so much energy and is so directed in an innovative and constructive direction. I have felt, somebody interviewed me yesterday for El Rodeo, the yearbook at USC, and she asked me, well, why did you come to Annenberg? And I thought, you know, People say things like this, but I mean it. I do not know a journalism school that could offer more hope of really helping lead in this era of difficult and challenging times, but very promising times if you embrace the notion that we have a great future if we're innovative and entrepreneurial. And that's the kind of future that Ernie is leading us toward. So I give you the dean.
Good morning, everyone. Everybody awake? Okay. Calisthenics. Someone once said that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And looking out at this audience and having been told by David and Jeff who is in the room today, I feel like I'm right at the cutting edge of the future. Because you all are the future. You're making the new media, you're making the content, you're creating the platforms, you are providing what Geneva calls information in the public interest. And so we are delighted to have you here at the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. We hope we have something to share with you, and we are confident that we can learn a lot from you over the course of this conference. Again, I want to thank Geneva Overholser for her leadership of the School of Journalism, and I also want to thank David, who's been here with us. And the mission of a great school and a great university is to do three things. You're supposed to teach well and research well and provide a lot of service. And David has done all three of those things. He's been teaching a very interesting course on this topic with Jeff Cowan on the issue of leadership and entrepreneurship. It's been a very successful course. He's done a tremendous amount of interesting research on business models, both in legacy media and new media, as well as being engaged in the topic of today's discussion. And he's also been of great service to the school as well as to the nation. He just returned, I think, from a hearing at the Federal Trade Commission, which is looking into the issue of competitiveness in the journalism space, and testified on his work there. So we really are delighted and lucky to have David with us. And I want to thank him for organizing this great conference along with the two Jeffs, who are also the leaders of the Center for Leadership and Public Policy, Jeff Cowan and Jeff Bond. We consider this school a full-service school. We do pretty much everything: communications, journalism, public relations, public diplomacy, across multiple platforms, all sorts of degrees. And it is fun, and I have to echo what Geneva said, that if you're interested in the topics that we are all interested in, what better time to be engaged than now, and what cooler area to be engaged in it than California. There's some pessimism, but I think your presence here today is a testament to how optimistic most of us are and most of us should be about these changes. We have tried to figure out what the heck we should teach in this kind of environment. You know, we have students who are going to be in the workforce for the next 50 years, so what do we teach them? So we've been wrestling with that, and my colleagues, Geneva and others, have sort of zeroed in on a couple of issues. One is leadership. We don't want our students just to survive. We want them to lead these changes in this tough environment. Innovation. We want our students to be innovative. Thirdly, and critically, they must be entrepreneurial in the broadest sense of the word. And in normative terms, we also want them to be able to contribute to service. And for all of these four things, I can think of no one who better represents this than Jarl Mohn. And I was, going over my remarks this morning, and I said, it really is a remarkable coincidence of leadership, innovation, entrepreneurship, and service that Jarl Mohn represents. This is not just being polite, although he is chairman of my board. So, I'm not completely foolish. But, we invited him to be chairman of the board precisely because he represents these things. Let me just rattle off a couple of things, because he has, in one career, he's sort of the multimedia guy personified, and the entrepreneurial guy, and the innovative guy, because he really has done all of this stuff. I actually double-checked this, since I've been influenced by my journalism colleagues, to make sure it was all true. This CV that he had, but it's actually true. He started off his career on the radio as an announcer, traditional radio stuff. Then he said, okay, this is interesting, but let me try something else. So he bought 2 radio stations at the ripe old age of 26, I think. It was just a couple of years ago. Bought 2 radio stations at the age of 26. That's pretty entrepreneurial. Apparently developed a taste for radio stations and bought a bunch more radio stations as an entrepreneur. Then he branched out and shifted platforms and got into television, and was the founder of E-Entertainment, E-exclamation point entertainment, and worked with MTV on the television side. That would be enough for most entrepreneurs just to stop there, but he didn't. He then returned and was also involved in the XM Sirius merger, back to his first love, radio, and is now an active investor in a number of different businesses and funds. As a private investor, works with venture capital funds, and is really at the cutting edge of thinking about how all of these issues come together. So when I say he is a personification of innovation, entrepreneurship, and leadership and service, I really do mean it. On the service side, he served on a number of boards in this neighborhood: KCRW, ACLU, and now we're delighted to have him as chairman of the board of counselors of the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. So without further ado, let me invite to the podium this gentleman who combines all of these really cool things in one, Jarl Mohn. Welcome, Jarl.
Good morning. Good morning. And thanks a lot, Dean Wilson. Really appreciate that. It's I tell you, I'm really proud to be excited with the Annenberg School, and it was Jeff Cowan that roped me in years ago, and then this guy got me more involved, and then I met this guy here, and he's the one that dragged me to this event this morning. I spoke at Jeff and David's class a month or so ago, and I really think it's terrific, and it's a real, I think, symbol of what's going on at Annenberg that this class even exists, because I'm not aware of anybody doing this kind of work right now. And I think it's wonderful, not just about teaching communication, teaching journalism, this whole notion of the community web. It's fantastic, the content piece of it, but now understanding and having a discussion about what the business models are. Because frankly, no one really has figured out the business models. I spend pretty much all day, every day, thinking about these various business models. And I spend a lot of time with really, really smart people thinking about these things, and no one's figured it out. So maybe it'll be you that does. But this is very iterative. One of the things Dean Wilson talks about a lot relative to the school and relative to what's going on here is the term innovation, and he's credited me with a lot of innovation. I never thought about it that way. That's kind of a high-class word for what I was doing, which is trying stuff. I mean, that's what innovation is. That's the way I think about it. I've never sat down and said, I think I'm going to be innovative and come up with a great idea. I just try stuff until I find out what works. And that's pretty much the way, I have built my career. But I want to compliment you all for being here today for this discussion, because I think it is an important discussion. The community web is, I think, at the front edge of what's going on and happening in journalism. And I think it's a very important category. So those of you who are actually jumping in the deep end of the pool to do this, I really commend you. As they say in Australia, our Aussie friends, good on you. Now, the first thing I'm going to do, I have to take care of some personal business here. As Jeff and David and Ernie know, I have a hobby. I take at least one picture a day of the most interesting thing. I've looked at the rest of my calendar, and I'm afraid that you are it. So if you don't mind, this is for my journal. I'm not blogging, by the way, but I will... Damn, you're good looking. All right, so we've gotten that out of the way. The format, we're going to chat for probably 15 minutes tops, maybe 17 minutes, then go into Q&A, because I think that way at least I'll be hopefully addressing some of the things that are interesting to you. Preferably some of the initial 15 minutes will be interesting too. We'll try to work on it. I'm going to try really hard not to do anything that even vaguely sounds like advice. I'm not a believer in advice. It's generally ignored or implemented incorrectly. So what I want to do is just share a handful of experiences, things that I've learned mostly through making huge mistakes, and some observations along the way. And perhaps one or two of them might be useful or beneficial, or at the least thought-provoking. And I want to introduce someone in the group. I just noticed Jeff Rowe in the back row there, my colleague. When I was running MTV and VH1 in the 80s, Jeff was a channel head for VH1, and we've since worked on a really interesting new media project called Views, which is a peer-to-peer distribution platform for high-definition video. And Jeff is a great entrepreneur and executive. If you have a chance to talk to him, he's also very interested in community sites right now and has some very interesting ideas he's working on. I'm going to spend just in the spirit of digital media and interactivity, I want to find, because there's a lot of stuff we can do here, and I want to tailor and edit this thing and morph it in real time. I want to ask a few questions here just so we can figure out what's the best way to spend the next couple of minutes. How many of you here actually are working on community websites? Amazing. That's fantastic. Okay. I'll keep that in. How many of you are either interested now or may be interested in sometime in the future raising money? Ooh, okay. I'll keep that in. How many of you are interested in the new business models? Ooh. This is going to be a long-ass speech. Very good. Let me think. What else? What else do I want to ask? We'll go from here. I do want to spend 1 second just to kind of run down some of the things I've worked on. Dean Wilson mentioned a number of them already. I feel like I've done pretty much everything in the media world, almost everything. I went down the list from starting in radio, AM, FM radio, ultimately got involved in satellite radio, being on the board of XM, and involved in the merger with Sirius. I've done cable television, having run MTV and VH1 in the 80s. And we'll tell you some stories about that. When Jeff and I had worked together, I founded E! Entertainment Television, ran that for 9 years, got involved in digital media. At Liberty Digital, where I was CEO, we did a lot of investing. That's where I got into the venture capital world. We invested in TiVo. We were early investors in TiVo and in Priceline and iBeam, and a whole raft of others that went belly up that you'd never heard of, but we're not going to mention. Been on a lot of media company boards. My exposure to the newspaper business, I was on the board of the EW Scripps Company, so we had newspapers there, broadcast television, of course the cable networks, TV, Food Network, Home and Garden. We've spun the cable networks out, and I'm actually with that company now, Scripps Networks Interactive. I was on the board of CNET, and then chairman of CNET for years until we sold the company to CBS. So I've done venture for over 11 years, 7.5 on my own account, done individual direct investing on my own in Oxygen Media, which was then sold to NBC Universal. StubHub, some of you may know StubHub, the secondary ticket outlet. I was an angel investor in StubHub. That was sold to eBay. And right now, I won't run down the whole list, but the ones that might be relevant to you, because they're kind of involved in digital media, Glam Media, the vertical ad network around fashion and style and women information. Yard Barker, which is a sports vertical ad network. The Rubicon Project, which is an LA-based company that does ad network optimization, which we'll touch on when we get into business models. Kick Apps, which is a set of social tools, so any media site can add community and social networking. The Ovation Network, a cable channel. Riot Games, video games. And Moby TV, which is television on the cell phone platform. So what I realized, I'd pretty much done everything with the exception of filmed entertainment, magazines, and pornography. And then I thought about the porn part. And I went, For years, I was on the board of LodgeNet, which is the provider of motion pictures and films in hotel rooms, and a decent portion of that business is the adult entertainment business. So I guess I was tangentially in that business. I want to start, one of the things I like doing, and this is very quaint for a new media. Some of you may recognize these things. But there were 3 articles that I saw this week that I thought were really interesting about what we're talking about. This was first from Wall Street Journal Monday, and the headline is AOL to produce news and video by the numbers. Did any of you see this piece? Great. I'm just going to read 2 lines from it. One says, AOL is putting the finishing touches on a high-tech system for mass-producing news articles, entertainment, and other online content. Mass production. And skipping ahead said, AOL is betting it can reinvent itself with numbers-driven approach to developing content based on what web search and other data tell us is most likely to attract audiences and sponsors. So mass production of content, that's number 1. Second article that I thought was really interesting was from Wednesday's Wall Street Journal. Is it copyright infringement if I'm reading from this to a group of people?
You have to pay them
Okay.
50 cents a word.
Rupert will come in and cuff me to this podium. The opening line is, Google said Tuesday it will let publishers set a daily limit on the number of articles readers can view for free through the internet giant search engine. The change will let publishers limit readers to 5 free articles per day, comes as news executives step up their war of words against Google, which they claim is pocketing advertising profits on the back of their free content. Did you guys see this one? Yeah. Interesting piece. And then my favorite of this comes from Monday's New York Times. This is David Carr's column called The Media Equation. He's a fabulous writer. And a couple of things really struck me. A lot of things struck me about this piece, but I'm going to read, again, 2 lines from it for you. He's talking about the rise of new media and the fall of old media, and he says, Calvinistic ideals are no match for macromedia economics that have vaporized significant components of the business model that drives traditional publishing. An incredible line. And he says, where do all the burgeoning pixels come from? Everywhere, and cheap at that. An outfit called Demand Media now tests headlines for reader salience and cranks out thousands of articles and videos daily that it pays about $20 a piece for. Web crawlers grab expensive content and replicate it far away from the organizations that produce it. Various media labs are now testing algorithms that assemble facts into narratives and deliver information no writers required. The results would not be mistaken for literary journalism. But on the web, pretty good, not even terrible, is often good enough. And finally, he says, certain stalwart brands, and this I think is the key point, which will lead to our next conversation. Certain stalwart brands will survive and even thrive because of a new scarcity of quality content for niche audiences that demand more than generic information. And I think that's where you come in. When we spoke at David and Jeff's class, one of the things I talked about was this: what I see this scale of content. On one side being commodity, and probably the most extreme example of commodity information would be what some people are talking about. Algorithm-based written, mechanically automated written materials. I think on the far end, I would put what I call extreme creative, value-driven content. And that is impossible to replicate, and it's impossible to produce for $20 or less a piece. And I think that's where you folks come in. And on the scale of commodity, I think if you're going to make a living at it, you can make a living as a commodity provider, commodity information provider, providing information that's available almost anywhere. But the only way to do that is if you have incredible scale, if you make it available to everybody so that you're selling each one of those impressions for pennies, and that you can make it work because there are plenty of them. But that's very, very tough to do. The big guys can do it. On the other end is, this extremely creative, value-driven content, and it's very hard to create. It's very hard to replicate. And I go back to my early years in the radio business, and I look at who has survived and who has done well. And if you look on the talent side, and again, Jeff back there is a guy who was in the radio business as I was. We both started out as disc jockeys, if you can believe that. Dumbest jobs on the planet. How any of us made it out alive is pretty remarkable. But most of these guys don't really have much going on for themselves. And there are a lot of guys who turn on any radio station anywhere just playing records. There's not much value there. But there are people who have created great brands for themselves and great value by doing things very, very innovative and creative, whether you like them or not. And I use two examples. Howard Stern is one, whose deal with Sirius XM was $500 million over 5 years, plus performance-based restricted stock, so on top of that. And the other end of the ideological spectrum is, say, Rush Limbaugh. You have guys who have really created these incredible personalities that have driven huge audiences. They're hard to replicate. You can't produce their content for $20 a pop. Value lies, I believe, in great creativity. I would ask this question. I think when we think about innovation and creativity, and these are subjects I'm fascinated in, Dubai, the restaurant Bazaar at the SLS Hotel here in town, and Cirque du Soleil have in common. And I'm blown away by all of them. Every one of these efforts that has occurred have been done by thousands and thousands of people, but in a different form. But the city of Dubai, or the Emirate of Dubai, is really the creation of Sheikh Mo. And a couple of nights ago at the Annenberg board meeting, Annenberg School board meeting, I got to meet the dean of the Journalism and Communication School there at the American University of Dubai. And it was fascinating. We had a great conversation. I've been to Dubai, and the Sheikh has this phenomenal vision of how to, notwithstanding the debt issues that they have, got a little bump in the road, but this guy's got a big plan. And he's actually got a book called My Vision, and I've just been blown away by the scale and the scope of the way this guy has thought about things. The restaurant Bazaar, have any of you ever eaten in there or heard about it? Who's eaten there? It is a phenomenal experience. It's like unlike any other restaurant you've ever been in. They've reinvented the whole idea of the way to present food, and it's a real adventure, and it's entertainment in and of itself before you even get to the meal. And Cirque du Soleil, it's taking the old circus and reinventing it. And that, to me, is what innovation and creativity is all about. When we look at interesting news stories, and we'll take something that's probably maybe one of the most important news stories on the front pages of the papers today, and that would have to be Tiger Woods. It's a laugh line. What's the difference between a Cadillac Escalade and a Titleist? Tiger Woods can drive a Titleist 350 yards. But if we look at the way that story broke, and the way the story has evolved, we're doing this just kind of as a more fun and interesting way to probe. There's the story that, Tiger Woods has driven his Cadillac Escalade into a fire hydrant, and, his wife has come out to rescue him with a 9-iron and bashed in the back of the car. And each moment, the story in real time is playing itself out with new information and new facts. Most of the information has very little shelf life. It's of the moment. It lasts for a minute, and then it's superseded by another piece of information. So the question is, how do you create value in that type of story? And that's, you dig up more information. Okay, who are the girls? What's their story? Are there others? Because now it's turned out that there are others. Are there pictures? Are they hot? He was using his cell phone. He was texting. What was he saying? Let's get the transcripts. Let's get tapes. And in terms of more information, then it's a deeper story. Infidelity amongst celebrities. Infidelities amongst sports celebrities. Whole cottage industries, evolving out of this particular story. But you could take any news story, and my contention is the deeper you go into it in terms of content and providing more analysis or a point of view that, an automated algorithm cannot generate, the more value you're going to create for yourself and for your website, regardless of how large or how small it's going to be. I want to shift from that point now, because we're talking about value creation and content, and just a little bit more on the business side. For those of you who are entrepreneurs, many of you thinking about raising money at some point, is why I asked the question. I always get asked, what do I look for when I look at a business plan or a company? And the first thing I always look for, because if I can't get past this, I don't even care about the business, and I don't care about the business plan, is the entrepreneur. And the first thing I want to know is, does this person have a track record for making money for investors? Now, many people don't, because they're first-time entrepreneurs. But if there is a track record, that's the first thing I look for. The second thing I look for is, if they don't have that, is there a track record of meaningful success? And I underline the word meaningful success, and this is a huge part of the interview process I do when I talk to entrepreneurs, is having them define success in their terms. From a business, I'm not talking about enlightenment, that's a different kind of success. It's wonderful, but we're not going to make those value judgments here. Just talking about business. I want to know how they define success in the business world. And so I listen very carefully to entrepreneurs defining and describing what it is that they've done really well and what it is that they've done successfully. And what that's done, for me at least, and again, this is just my point of view, is it's helped me separate what I call administrators and bureaucrats from real value creators, people who get things done. I look for a track record of hiring really good people. I have never seen a company succeed with C players or even B- players. Another thing I look for is the ability to collaborate. Have they collaborated? Do they believe in collaboration? Again, I rarely see long-term success with one person top-down calling all the shots. So I look for that. And I look for a solid plan, an idea how it's going to evolve. But I follow the 80-20 rule. 80% follow the plan, 20% be opportunistic and flexible. And that gets back to the trying stuff point of view. And you probably read, Google has an edict internally, which is they want everybody there to spend 20% of their time on something that's not core to their job. And that's where a lot of innovation and great ideas come from. And I think it's I try to do it myself in terms of spending at least 20% of my time on new and interesting projects. And then we talked about innovation. I'm going to jump ahead because I want to have enough time for Q&A to talk about one story of collaboration I use frequently, and I did it in the class for David and Jeff. And this was when I was running E. And this story to me embodies what collaboration and innovation and idea generating is all about. When we launched the network, we needed 6 half-hour shows to create a 3-hour block for prime time. I gave the programming staff the money, said, here's the money, come back with the ideas. God bless you, I love you. They go away, they come back, they've got a big chart up. This is a couple months later, and they're showing me the grid. I'm going, I'm not the brightest guy in the world, but that looks like 5 shows. Where's the 6th show? We want 6 half-hour shows. They go, well, we ran out of money. We don't have money for 6. We got money for 5. And I said, no. 3 hours, 6 divided by 2 is 3. 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. That doesn't work. We have a 2.5-hour block. You got to come up with another show. We don't have any money. Give me more money. Got no more money. So I'm running at the beach. I'm thinking, what kind of programming can we create for free, for nothing? And I'm going back to the MTV model, thinking about taking content that's provided by other people and repackaging it. And at that time, some of you may remember, I have to be careful to telling the story because as I get older and the audiences get younger, this is going to be like Marconi talking about his first broadcast of radio. There was a program on when Geraldo Rivera had one of his talk shows, TV talk shows. He had some white supremacists on at one point, and they got into a fight, and one of the skinheads picks up the chair, throws it at Geraldo, and breaks his nose. Any of you remember that thing? Okay, right. Everybody took that clip and was playing it. And it was fascinating to see Geraldo. I don't know if it was just seeing Geraldo with a metal folding chair, bashed in his head that was so exciting, or if it was just the train wreck, watching the train wreck. But everybody picked that clip up, and I was thinking, my God, there's so many of these talk shows on at the same time. At the time, you had Sally Jesse Raphael, you had Jenny Jones, you had Jerry Springer, you know, Morton Downey Jr., you had all these talk shows, and one of them was worse than the next one. And I said, this is my idea of great television. There's great stuff here. And every one of the show has one of those, at least one of those moments every day. And I said, why don't we, I come back to them and said, let's take that moment every day, pick it out, we'll put a host on, and we'll just show these clips, and we won't have to pay for it, because we'll talk about who's going to be on Jerry Springer tomorrow, and it will be promotional in nature, and therefore, we won't have to pay. So I'm presenting this to the programming team. They're all sitting around the table. It's dead silence. Finally, the head of programming, Fran Shea, says, that's a terrible idea. That idea sucks. I said, well, you got a better one? And she said, well, no, we need more money. I said, mine's free. Mine's like costs nothing. So I said, if you come back with a better idea, we'll use yours. And they went away. No one came up with a better idea. So it was, how can we at least make this thing? By the way, I didn't even think this idea was that good. I just knew we needed a half hour. We're going to put it on. So I gave it to them. I said, you got to make it better. They had brainstorming. Somebody said, hey, they came up with a whole list of names. The group decided that Talk Soup was a great name for the show. And I said, that's fabulous. I love that. Let's call it Talk Soup. Then they trying to find a host. When we moved from Movie Time to E, we got rid of all the on-air talent. We were repositioning the network, changing the name, changing the logo. We all said, you know, it's a bad idea to have you can't change everything, the entire identity, and have the same talent on. So we got rid of all the talent. Somebody came in and said Greg Kinnear would be terrific talent for this thing. And I had seen him. I thought he was very good on camera, very attractive guy. But I said, he just reads prompter. He can't ad-lib. They said, no, you don't know. He really does. He's very, very good at that. You got to see the test. So they bring me the tape. They show me the test. We had tape back in those days. And he is good. So I said, okay. So they put Greg Kinnear on. They sat him on a stool, shot him in front of a blue screen with chroma key stuff going on in the back. So it literally cost a nickel to do. And the idea was, let's make it fun. And each member of the team contributed something. And all of a sudden, my terrible idea, everybody's kind of bought into a little bit and kind of improved along the way. We put it on the air with very low expectations. We launched the 3-hour block. What's the hit? Those of you that following these things at the time, Talk Soup was our hit. It was none of us expected it. It was an act of desperation. And I have found over and over again, my entire career has been an act of desperation. And it kind of worked out, which proves, you remember the screenwriter William Goldman said, nobody knows anything. I think I personally have proved that myself many times. I've kind of stumbled my way into success, trying things. Now that I've met Dean Wilson, I'm going to tell people I've just been innovating this whole time. I just didn't know it. So we will jump ahead. We're fast running out of time, and I wanted to leave time for questions and answers. So why don't I open it to David and then to the group, and so we can wrap up on time. Thank you.
Jarl, your 80-20 calculation is an interesting one in terms of saving some time in the day and the week and so on to think creatively, to kind of step back from the fray. How do you step back from the fray when you really can't, or you feel like you can't? And how do you make sure that happens when really, and I think this is probably true for many of the people in this room, that the day-to-day stuff actually adds up to 110, and so there's not much room for 20.
It's a great question, and it's like my mother used to say, do as I say, not as I do. When I look back on my days of actually running businesses and operating businesses, if I honestly appraise, before I even get to the 20% of innovation and creativity and thoughtfulness, just growing a business, I would tell you honestly, I probably spent less than 10% on things that really moved the meter, really moved the needle. And 90%, probably even more, was the day-to-day things that I needed to get done. The boxes that needed to get checked. Because it's very difficult, and it's overwhelming day to day. One of the things I like doing what I do now, where I just invest in companies and I sit on boards, is today 90% of my time, 90% is thinking big picture about these companies. I have the benefit of not having to worry about is so-and-so happy, you know, and managing employees and so forth. But day to day, I personally think the only way I could do it would be to allocate time on a weekly basis to get out of the office, or taking a couple of days, a month away from everything, because if I'm in my house or I'm in my office, I'm going to deal with the stuff that's in front of me. And the only way I personally can get myself in a different frame of mind is to physically remove myself. And that's what I would probably do.
Yeah. Jeff, the questions we're going to take from the audience, should they go to the microphone?
I think we'll pick it up from the shotgun and we'll point the mic. So
okay, so they can just... I'm going to ask one more and then be ready to ask Jarl your own questions. When you started, you listed a remarkable menu of organizations and ventures you've been involved in, and all kinds of business models that you've been involved in. Granted that no one has, quote, figured out the current media business model going forward, I'm sure you've got some thoughts about where a productive model might lie, or perhaps won't lie. Could you talk a little bit about your thoughts about what looks promising to you?
I don't think what I'm going to say is going to be anything that you haven't all thought about a great deal, perhaps even more than I have. I think it's going to be a combination of, when we're talking specifically about content, subscription and advertising. And I think the advertising component, which hasn't really fully been figured out at this point, or exploited or grown at the speed with which we like to, although it's growing at an incredible speed. There are companies, one of the ones I've invested in, the Rubicon Project, which is an LA-based company, is a network optimization company, and what it does is it looks at every piece of content. This is primarily display advertising right now, and it looks at content. It looks at the page that it's on. It analyzes, the spot, what the content is, goes out, finds the appropriate ad works with 250 ad networks, looks for the best CPM for the publisher, represents the publisher, and then picks the ad up and inserts it in the website. And I think that is something, while I don't believe that good quality journalism is going to be created, using algorithms, I do think that advertising placement and efficient advertising placement is going to continue to evolve along that path. So somebody will be able to analyze really great quality journalism or great quality article, grade the reader, grade the content, and generate the highest possible revenue for that placement of the ad, whether it's a display ad, a banner ad, or some rich media or video ad. And so I think when that starts to happen, the real quality will rise to the surface. A lot of people are going to make money on the commodity side of the equation as well, but I think really limited reach, very quality-rich content is going to be rewarded then.
Interesting. So questions for Jarl?
I've got a question about a particular business model that I developed. Last December I wrote an essay called How to Save the New York Times Business Proposal. I sent it to the New York Times publisher, president, and editor the day that I wrote it, advising them to become an online university to diversify as an educational institution. And in August they launched it. It's called the New York Times Knowledge Network, nytimesknownow.com. And I was curious if you had any thoughts about the future of journalism institutions, either branching out as universities, online education institutions, or existing newspapers that are struggling to survive merging into universities.
It's a really interesting thought. I have not spent any time thinking about that. I even though I am now the chair of the Board of Counselors for the Annenberg School, I will tell you my personal involvement or knowledge about the actual business of universities is minimal, and so I don't think I would have a thoughtful or an intelligent frame of reference on that at all. I do think newspapers have big challenges, and that might be, affiliating with universities might be an interesting way to go, but I've not spent enough time contemplating it to be thoughtful. Yes?
I'm Angela Shaw. I'm here for reportingonhealth.org, which is a California Endowment Health Journalism Fellowship website, which is USC affiliated. My question, actually, the talk soup lesson is a really good one for new media, I think, where when your back's against the wall, you just kind of try something. And I'm wondering if you have any other sort of, I won't say the word advice, but ideas about lessons new media, community media can take from old media. What kinds of things can we salvage from old media, as we create quality content on the web?
Well, I don't know. It's true that when one's back is against the wall, one is almost forced to try new things. But I think it's good to do it anyway. Even when your back isn't against the wall, it's just. We used to have a phrase that desperation was the mother of invention, and it's always been the case. What lessons can be taken from old media? There's a whole body of knowledge about what people want and what they like and what they're willing to pay for and what they're willing to sit through advertising for. That I think is very instructive. To me, new media is just a different way of delivering, content or ideas that have been around for a long time. Maybe refined. With community websites, we're talking about more narrowly defined. When I began, I remember going to a radio conference. This is a really interesting perspective. In this days, just to put a framework on it, you'd have a handful of radio stations that would have in their market, let's say. You could even have a radio station have a 20% share of listening, and then you have a bunch who were in the mid-teens, and somebody stood up at that time. This had to be in the 70s. Said, sometime in the future, in the not too distant future, all the radio stations are going to have a 4 share, and all the guys that were running and they were all guys at the time that were running the radio stations. There was this big gasp, they're thinking, oh my God, how can that possibly be? And there's one person in the back of the room who obviously had a very low-rated radio station said, can I have my 4 share now? And in effect, that's what's happened. You don't see radio stations with 20 shares anymore. They got 4. It's all been divided up. And so I think, this community web is a great example of just getting narrower and narrower. Radio got very narrow. Television, with the onset of cable networks, started going after individual demographics and groups. Magazines have done it forever. Now, the web is even doing it on a far finer level. So, but the interests, the things people are interested in, I think, remain the same. You had a question right down here. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks again for coming. My name is Jacob Bayless. I'm from EmpireReport.org, a community-based news site in the North Bay, in San Francisco area. You actually stole my first question, which was, what was the story behind Talk Soup? I was in college at the time, and it's sort of poignant. I didn't have time to watch all the talk shows. It was great to have something that summed it all up.
We had an educational purpose.
My question, though, in light of what I'm doing and a lot of people in the room are doing, I'm very interested to hear your take on experimentation and R&D. How has that kind of a focus played into all of the different, obviously, experiments you've done, but keeping focused on that where you might be stuck in a rut doing something? I mean, obviously, Talk Soup, I think, is still going. Is that right?
There's some variations now called The Soup. I think it was off for a period of time, and it's back with a new name, but it's generally the same idea.
So media is obviously really in a doldrum right now, looking for something new. How has experimentation played into your career?
It's been my whole career. Not for any other reason than being backed against the wall and desperation and trying things. One of the things we talked about in the class, and was in my original notes, I have run and built 8 businesses myself. Now I'm involved in far more. I'm an investor in 16. There's not one business plan that I've created, there's not one business plan I've ever seen that the business evolved the way it was supposed to have, okay? And it doesn't mean, so I work with a lot of VCs, incredibly smart guys. They're out of Stanford, and they'll rip apart a business plan, in like seconds. I've seen, entrepreneurs be brought to tears. I don't even look at them, because I will look at them, but not because I'm really interested in the third year. Your revenue assumption is that you're going to get this percentage of that market, because it doesn't work out that way. I use it as kind of an IQ test and a reality test for the entrepreneur. Tell me how you got to these assumptions. Tell me what happened. What do you think is going to happen? If it doesn't happen, what do you think you're going to do? I think experimentation, trying stuff, innovation, you have to do it, because I've never in my life, not once, seen a business develop and evolve the way it was on paper when it started. Ever. Not one.
Let's take one more.
One more.
My name is Corey Takahashi. I work in journalism and also marketing and media production. You mentioned Howard Stern and Rush Limbaugh as media entrepreneurs who deliver creative content. I agree with that. Do you have any example of journalists, though, who do the same and are successful outside of maybe a major media outlet?
Well, it depends on how broadly you define journalism. I think there are, a lot of journalists. The example we used in the class, at the time, I wanted to do something fun today, so we used Tiger Woods, and it's probably not the best example I could have used. But at the time we had the class, Ted Kennedy had died, and we talked about a whole range of ways that that story could be converted into content and create value. The actual, today Ted Kennedy died after, a long illness is a piece of commodity information, and you can go from that to an analysis of a writer writing a story about, the man, the difference between the man and the politician, to someone on the extreme end, writing the definitive biography. So, is it journalism in terms of showing up in a newspaper and being the Rush Limbaugh or the Howard Stern in the newspaper world? I don't think that exists today that much, but I do think in the publishing world and the book world, it certainly can. People have done it at various levels. Ken Oletta certainly has done it covering media on the in magazines, newspapers, and in books. But it's a different world. I think the written word today does not command the kind of, doesn't create the kind of value in the world that, say, a radio personality.
More of a journalist sense. Rush Limbaugh and Howard Stern, they could be called journalists, I guess, depending on your definition, but I think most people see them also as entertainers. I'm just wondering if there's anyone strictly who would be more defined as a journalist than an entertainer on the Rush Limbaugh or Howard Stern side.
I'm sure if I thought hard enough, a lot of people have morphed and have gone from journalists to being on-camera people and have created a lot of value. I mean, is Brian Williams a journalist? He's a very highly paid journalist. I happen to think he's probably the best, on-air television newscaster there is, and he makes a great living out of that. So, is he making as much as Howard Stern? Probably not, but he's not going to starve. I think we have to wrap it up.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Jarl, I think that maybe you were one of the early aggregators there with TalkSoup.
That's right. We were aggregating, we didn't even know it.
Thanks, Jarl.
Each of these presentations is going to be quicker than probably anybody would like, including the presenters. So I'm apologizing in advance for this rapid-fire program to those of you who are presenting. On the other hand, the Federal Trade Commission this week gave me just 3 minutes to make my statement in D.C., so my empathy is not unlimited here. We're going to start by setting a bit of a stage here with Peter Krasilovsky, whom many, if not all of you, know as one of the leading authorities on local online media, and has been, in fact, immersed in interactive media since the mid-1980s. He's program director as well as vice president of the Kelsey Group, where he runs the Marketplaces program, and also prominent in his local onliner website. And I also like him because he's a real tall guy. Peter.
David, from one tall guy to another, you should have tried out the microphone for me. But no, thank you for having me here. I don't know if you're all aware of just what an incredible peer group that David has developed here. I mean, in this room, there's kind of a hall of fame of community, and I'm just extremely impressed and I'm proud to be here. And it's nice to be back on campus. As David mentioned, I'm a mid-1980s graduate of the Annenberg program. And I really like that it's merged with journalism in Geneva, because it never made any sense. We had communications management over here, and presumably we'd all be telephone engineers or something, and then we'd have journalism over here. Really, it's all one subject, isn't it? So, today we're going to talk about my favorite subject, which is community and money. It's something that I've been really making a career out of ever since I was at the Annenberg School. So our interest in community and money is not entirely altruistic, as you can imagine. We're working with most of the major companies in the local advertising space, and we're all looking at hyperlocal and community as avenues for increasing traffic to our sites, if I can say that, increasing the amount of content that we can work, and other types of partnerships. So it's very important, I think, to most of the major companies in the space, whether it's Microsoft and Google and AT&T and others, that hyperlocal really succeeds on its own merits, and perhaps there's a disruptive element involved as well. So I've been thinking a lot about community, and it hasn't always been in terms of making money. Throughout my career, I've been doing all these kind of interesting things, but there was this raw assumption in the mid-1980s. The French government was investing in Minitel. There's always an assumption that community and digital was going to be so important. It was going to be such an important part of our society that maybe we didn't really have to worry about making money. And I think that, you know, all of our whole economy has changed. Everybody has to earn their own way. So maybe we really should be focusing in that way. So let's think about how digital media, including cable TV, and all these things have evolved over the years since I've been involved in the mid-1980s. I mean, at first we thought in terms of a kind of a welfare model, community support. We thought in terms of, well, we can get franchise fees, you know, charge a tax of 5% of cable TV bills, and give it to public education and government channels, and that can fund it. We don't really have to worry about, you know, being connected to all the commercial elements of a society. Well, you know, I don't think we really had much traction with public education and government channels over time. And we also, you know, had the next best thing. We looked at grants and, you know, raising money. And that was always nice. I did a project with the Markle Foundation where we said, you know what, CNN, you're never going to be covering certain types of public interest services within your normal programming. So let's give you a few $100,000 and you can fund it. And we see things like that today with the Jim Lehrer NewsHour and their health things. It's nice to have these sponsorship type models. But really, I think more and more, I think all of you out there are out there thinking, you know, not only do we want to raise money, as Mr. Mohn said, but we want to make some money. So some of the models that we have, some of the commercial models, obviously cause-related marketing. You can tie yourself up with some groups that want to live off of your good image in the community. Advertising, e-commerce, and also general e-marketing support. You know, you're actually going in there working with small businesses. Maybe you can provide them with some technical support on the internet. So these are some of the things that we've been looking at. And, you know, there's no harm in it. I remember a few years ago I went to a group, a fairly radical group, a media giraffe at the University of Amherst. It's a lot of fun. And there was this tremendous tension between people who were making money with the community and people who just wanted to, you know, serve their own interest, their own political interest. And I always thought that was a mistake. Really, markets are conversations that we saw 10 years ago with this wonderful book, The Clue Train Manifesto. How do we tie the commercial aspects and the community aspects together? I think there is something. How many times have I talked to car dealers and real estate agents and others who are actually hurt that their local newspapers, journalists, can't come up and talk to them when they're writing about the real estate industry, or they're writing about the fall of Ford Motor Company or something like that. When this is, like I was saying with Geneva, there absolutely has to be a sense that the small business in a community is an important aspect of it. And hyperlocal commerce is as an important part of this as hyperlocal journalism. And I'll be on that soapbox the rest of my life. So one of the ways, if you're talking about making advertising, there are all these assumptions that, oh, people will just give me money, they want to feel good, and all this other stuff. If you're trying to sell to a small business in a community, they're going to look at their return on investment. What is their cost per customer acquisition? And these are some examples, and these are the kinds of ways that you may think about it if you're trying to serve these businesses on an advertising model. So what are the different types of advertising products that are really out there that, if you're building a community site, that you may want to get engaged in? And obviously we look at banner ads, text ads, Google kind of thing. Directories is an important part of it. Classified ads. We've been hearing more and more that you can build different types of networks, perhaps of adjacent hyperlocal sites as well. And maybe even building a print product. We saw insider pages here in Pasadena a couple of years ago say, it's not just online, we have to reach people with a print directory as well. Very interesting. I mean, these are all different ways that we may consider making money somehow or other for our community or hyperlocal site. So there's also an assumption of, oh, well, we'll just start selling advertising and people have an unlimited budget. You actually have to reach people where they live, the small businesses where they live. Most small businesses spend in the low range, if we break it up into 4 brackets, in the $1,500 range of advertising per year. That's pretty much the kind of company that you may be trying to target. That's different than a typical Yellow Pages advertiser who might be spending $3,500 a year for their entire program. So you're getting a piece of the action, but there's a lot of action. So let's think about, if you're thinking, I want to get involved in local advertising is $155 billion a year. These are the players in local advertising. Are we competing with these players? Are we partnering with these players? What part of the ecosystem is our community sites? The answer is varied all over the map. But it's interesting just to think about, well, I'm really more of a radio station kind of play. Maybe some of you think that. Maybe you think you're more of a newspaper kind of play. It's just really interesting to put yourself in perspective if you're really going to start being serious about becoming a commercial entity in any way whatsoever. So when we think about advertising, only a portion of it is online. A lot of us tend to be online-centric. We forget about what really plays. About 19% of online spending today in the local sphere is there, and a lot of it's driven by Google and other search. So again, we got to think about what's home plate for a community site. It's very important to think that way. And one nice thing is if you think you're going to get a piece of the action, the piece of the action is going to invariably get larger. We're expecting to see local revenues more than double over the next several years. Elizabeth, you don't need to take notes. I'm going to send this to you later on. What great people we have in this room. It's fantastic. So,
I will write down everything you say for you.
So that's it. Look at the BIA Kelsey, my consulting firm, and we can build all the forecasts of how much money there is in the pie, and it makes everybody comfortable. But we do know that there are disruptive elements happening all over the place. I applaud them. We have no idea how important they're going to be. None of us. So I'm extremely interested in what the impact of social media is going to be on both people who want to use it and spend money on advertising, but also people who want to avoid advertising by using social media. Maybe a Facebook page is going to be more important than anything they could have done with the Yellow Pages. Oh, we don't really know the answer, do we? So that's just something that's really important. You can see how it's being used by so many small businesses. That's what an SMB is. And it's just something for us to ponder. How can it be used? Well, this is what I was saying before in terms of using your community presence and your knowledge of the local players. You can actually help them get more involved with technology and services. Our friends at NCI, which puts out the real estate book that you see in front of grocery stores, Apartment Finder, things like that, they said, you know what? Real estate agents aren't necessarily going to be buying full-page ads in our little handout books anymore, but they still use us as a marketing resource. It's very important. They said, let's just do the social media for them. They don't know how to do it, but we do. We have a lot of people who are involved with internet marketing. So I find that to be very compelling. They're charging $290 a month. They're going to help them with search engine optimization. The number one thing a real estate agent wants right now is to be at the top of Google. Maybe that's the most important place to be. So that's really neat. And we're seeing this happen in lots of other spheres as well. One part of it is advertising. The big problem with advertising is you have to sell it, right? You have to have a sales force. Many people in the community world don't actually like salespeople. It's just a cultural thing. I understand it. I really do. So there's a hope that self-service advertising is going to be something now that people have been trained by Google AdSense. They'll go on the web, they'll buy it. We did a survey of self-service advertising and different publishers. It isn't really there yet. But who's to say that over the next couple of years we're not going to see some massive evolution? And I have a lot of confidence myself. It's interesting, you talk to the Yellow Pages people that say self-service will never work. They need our sales skills to continue to buy Yellow Pages and to upsell every year. Talk to the newspaper people who really don't want to go deep into the community beyond auto dealers and hospitals and things like that. And this is their holy grail. They've got to make self-serve work. So it's an interesting thing. There's a new vendor called PaperG, and they're specifically saying to a lot of hyper-local sites, as well as newspapers, they're saying, here's our self-serve model. We have basically a bulletin board. Go in, do it yourself. And some of the companies they're working with are making in the 5 figures, $20,000. I can't figure out how much that is. Just by throwing it out there and putting it on their community site. The New Haven Independent's is an example that I'm using here. So then there's a sense of going back to the sponsorship model. And so many people like sponsorships because, it's kind of like brand advertising, image advertising. You're not really responsible for quantifying anything. And so many of us are more comfortable in that environment. But I like what the Examiner.com people are doing. They're saying, hey, why don't you just hook in with specific bloggers that we have, or they call them examiners. And so they have a situation in Denver where they have a Loveland ski resort, and they said, you know what, we're just going to sponsor all your ski bloggers out there. And that's worked pretty well. I mean, it's still an introductory stage. Maybe you can do that. It's actually sponsoring specific writers, and maybe advertisers will find that appealing. I know that our friends at SAC Press are doing the same thing with their CMS system. Ben, you're here? Yeah, good to meet you. Boy, that's one innovative company right there. So a lot of people are also focused on small business directories. I can tell you that some of the more successful hyper-local sites, if there's such a thing as more successful, and no one's making a lot of money, but really focus on building local directories. They're getting the most usage from their directories and their databases. But it enters into all these different issues. What's a directory? How do you sell it? What kinds of features are you adding? Is it a good foundation for selling all the other range of advertising products? Remember, when it comes to small businesses, and that's what most communities are made up of, it starts out really with directory advertising, considered purchases like that, the plumber, the lawyer, and things like that. So certainly something to consider. And we have an interesting situation with networks being built too. Another holy grail for a lot of community people, thinking, I'll just wait here and people will hook into my network and I'll be able to get some national and regional advertising. I think that's potentially a nice thing. I see Jonathan Weber's here. Maybe we can talk about what Growth Spur is doing. You're advising them. You have to deal with the appeal of your network, of your site, and your demographics and your reach to become an important part of any network. I mean, it's an advertising situation. So we'll see more about that. I'm especially impressed with what some of the guys have done with the adjacent services, where some of the bloggers, like in Seattle, they have 5 neighborhood sites that have all teamed up together, and it's called Next Door Media. And they're able to say, you know what, we have a reach in Seattle, which is actually pretty comparable to what they're getting with the Seattle Times. I really like that kind of local network approach.
1 minute, Peter.
So, David, I'm there. Here are my conclusions. Ultimately, we think that going head-to-head for ad sales with local media companies may not be that successful. And you know that sponsorships and cause-related marketing are your low-hanging fruit. I mean, you know, you can certainly sell your charm and charisma. Self-serve's okay, but, you know, it's just limited at this time. Really what I think is working with your local businesses, extending your relationships with them, being able to sell a variety of things like search engine optimization and websites, a very strong potential for a lot of you. And ultimately, hyperlocal sites aren't really very important in the scheme of things. I'm not telling people to invest in the world of hyperlocal community right now, but you know, at the same time, it's at a premium. Good content's always valuable. And your efforts to form partnerships with local media and directory companies probably are not going to go to waste. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Let's have a few questions for Peter.
Susan.
Okay, I don't want to get up, so I'm going to try to be loud. So I thought that your observation that building relationships with small businesses and then selling services as a way to have an additional revenue stream was a really good idea, but it's something that we're struggling with because we also are a reporting arm, so we're blending reporting with community news, and I'm a little bit concerned about, you know, doing consulting for the local energy company or the local museum, and then also writing about them. So wonder if you have thoughts about that.
The Church and State. Susan's with Oakland Local, which is a great new site. You know, there's a lot of education on both sides. I mean, I've worked with a lot of corporations, I think you have too, and you actually have to tell them, we won't do this. Working with telephone companies has been my basic existence for many years, and they don't mind if you stand on the top of the table and say, no, you want to work with the hippies, become one. But yeah, there's a lot of push and shove. I wish I could give you a more specific answer.
Okay, thank you.
Your last point in your last chart said hyperlocals are going to become a major part of the advertising online. You don't expect that to be the case down the road, or what's...
There's just no way to forecast it. There's no real hyperlocal revenues today. And whether hyperlocal is a destination site or it's just part of a broader, broader mix, local advertising in general is entirely fragmented, and everybody's getting a piece of the action. Do you know in most cities that not a single site has more than 15% of the overall traffic? So, yeah, it's hard for us to say, okay, here are eight different local media, and hyperlocal is the ninth. Somehow or other, I don't see it shaping up that way.
One more question.
I have a question about pricing ads. I imagine it has to be based on the traffic to your site, but is there any rule of thumb?
For pricing?
Yeah.
Pricing advertising?
Mm-hmm. Based on the traffic of your site?
Well, until most sites receive a certain amount of traffic, they generally go for a flat rate, and it becomes more brand-oriented advertising. And I think that's where most hyperlocal sites are today. I'd like to make one point. There's a couple of sites that it won't be named here, where they like to exaggerate their impact within the community. One site says that 45% of Pleasantville, New York is going to them. You go to the train station in Pleasantville, New York, and you ask people whether they go to the site, and nobody does. So in order to keep your credibility, it's real important to pass the backyard barbecue or the train station test to make sure that you really are reaching the types of community users that you think you are. So anyway, I'm here all day. I want you to know, I'll be writing about the entire day's events on my blog, Local Onliner. And David, just such a great event. Thank you for letting me introduce
Thank you, Peter. That's great.